All right, so let's pick this screencast up with our old buddy Sherman, who has taken over Atlanta and burned it up. And of course, the Confederates don't care that Lincoln has been reelected, and the Confederates don't care that the United States has written the 13th Amendment because they have their own country now. And they're just going to go on fighting. It doesn't matter to them. Except that Sherman is going to try to help Grant make sure that it's going to matter. So when Sherman finishes with Atlanta, his next job, according to Grant and him, they made the plan together. If you look at the map, the idea is for him to march across Georgia to Savannah, take the port of Savannah, then up through South Carolina to North Carolina, and then, if need be, meet Grant up and trap Lee in Virginia. Now, Sherman doesn't worry about where he's going to get food for his men. He simply takes what he needs off the land, meaning from people's farms. And his objective is to wreak as much havoc as possible. So as he's going through small towns and farming places, if he camps out there for a night or two, his men are going to kill the livestock they need to eat. They're going to pick the corn out of your field or whatever to eat. And then as they leave, they're going to shoot the rest of the livestock and burn the rest of the crops. Maybe your house, if you've not been very nice to them. If you've been okay with them, they might leave you your house. A lot of times after this march started, it was sort of like, I would say it's almost like runaway scrape in Texas history. So as people realize that Sherman's guys are coming their direction, the people leave. People leave in front of him because they don't even want to be around to see whether he's going to treat them nicely or not. They just want to be out of there. And it sounds awful, terrible, but it has a purpose. And the purpose is that last bullet point. I mean, like I said in the second to last, they burn livestock, they burn crops, kill livestock, cities, homes, tear up railroad tracks, burn bridges, cut telegraph wires, anything that they feel like the Southerners can use to help wage war, they destroy it, which means that's almost everything. The purpose is to make your enemy fear you so much that they will give up. They're going to give up. And it had a demoralizing effect even on Southern soldiers that weren't right there, because there's not many Southern soldiers in Sherman's path. Mostly they're up in Virginia fighting with General Lee. But when word reaches them of what's going on in the South, at their homes, at their farms, at their places of business, in their small towns, they all wish that they were at home defending their actual places where they live rather than being with Lee fighting Grant. And so it has a demoralizing effect on the soldiers, even though they're not right there. Now, as Sherman's troops sweep across the South, and even as Grant's troops had swept down the Mississippi River Valley, obviously African American slaves in their wake are liberated. Those people, especially if the white slave owners are running away, they're not forcing their African American slaves to go with them. They're not worrying about that at that point in time. They're just trying to get out. A lot of the African Americans wanted to trail along with Sherman, especially because Grant had already left. He'd already been back in Virginia fighting Lee. And people have sometimes said that Sherman was not considerate of the slaves, that he didn't care about them. It wasn't that. He was more than happy to be liberating slaves. It was a thrilling thing, I'm sure, for him and his men. But he couldn't have men and women and children following along with his fighting machine. They were on a mission. Their mission was to wreak havoc across the South, capture the ports of Savannah and Charleston, and then move north to help Grant if he needed it. They could not be tending after men and women and children who don't know how to fight like they do. And so he discouraged them from coming along with them. He encouraged them to enjoy their new liberation, understand that they were free now, and go along with their lives in that manner. But of course, if you've been a slave your whole life and now all of a sudden now you're free, you really are sort of like, okay, but now what do I do? And so it was a difficult situation, and it's a situation that will be addressed in Reconstruction and not addressed very well. All right. When Sherman gets to the city of Savannah in December, he sends President Lincoln this telegram at the bottom and presents it to him as an early Christmas present. His Excellency President Lincoln, I beg to present you as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah with 150 heavy guns and plenty of ammunition, and also about 25,000 bales of cotton. W.T. Sherman, Major General. It must have been the icing on Lincoln's cake after being elected president. And by the next spring, after Grant had been pounding away at Petersburg, now remember, he has got this city under siege. It wasn't a case of him attacking Lee head on. He's just simply has more of everything. He can keep getting his men and ammunition resupplied where Lee cannot. And so he keeps the city under siege and keeps the Southerners from getting any kind of resupply. And finally, Petersburg falls, the Confederate line breaks, and Lee withdraws. And Grant then begins marching towards Richmond. Now, when Jefferson Davis hears of this, he and his cabinet begin to start leaving Richmond, and I want you to pay attention to what he orders people to do in Richmond before they leave, because a lot of the Southerners, just like across the South, they're afraid of Grant. They're going to get out. They know Grant and his men are coming, and they want to get out of Richmond. So what does Jefferson Davis order them to do? He says, order bridges, weapons, and anything useful to the enemy, meaning the North, be burned. Sounds a lot like Sherman. So they had a big armory there with a lot of ammunition and weapons. It blew up like a big explosion because, of course, when they set that on fire, it blows up. And by April 4th, the city of Richmond was safe enough for the President of the United States, President Lincoln, to visit it with his son in tow, and even visit Jefferson Davis's home and sit at his desk. So eventually, Lee surrenders to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia on April 9th. So that's a week later. Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia is not a courthouse. That's the name of a city. Please remember that. There's a courthouse there. It's just that I want you to remember that Lee surrenders to Grant in someone's farmhouse, not at a courthouse. It's just the name of the city is Appomattox Courthouse. And the reason Lee surrendered is he had no intention of surrendering, but Grant had captured a supply train. So now, again, Grant is getting him where it hurts. Lee is hoping to be resupplied and he can fight on, but no. Again, Grant has got him so that he doesn't have any supplies that he needs. No food, no ammunition, no whatever it is he needs to run his army. Now, Grant's idea of surrender and Lincoln's idea of surrender were probably two different things. Grant, being the soldier that he was, probably would have said, do you want us to line people up and shoot them? Do you want us to hang some people? What is it you want us to do with these people? But Lincoln's terms of surrender were much different than that, because Lincoln was not the soldier, he was a politician, and he's trying to bring the country back together. Lincoln tells them that Lee's officers can keep their small arms, meaning their pistols, not their big guns, and that if you have a horse, you can keep it, and that Grant should give Lee's men food because they're hungry. And I want you to notice the third bullet point because it's really the most important one, and if you can just keep that in your head, you will know the terms of the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse pretty much. Lincoln basically told Grant just to say, tell the men to lay down their guns and go home. They have to leave their guns behind, but they need to go home. Because Lincoln knew how bad it was going to be for them once they got home. There wasn't a whole lot of home to go to. Now, let's look at the last three bullet points for just a minute. Obviously, the North's victory saved the country and freed the slaves. The South is left in ruins and remains so for decades. Now, the slaves are free, but next week when we talk about Reconstruction, you're going to see that dealing with those freed slaves, or freedmen, as they're called, is going to present issues, and it's not solved right away by any stretch. I also have this graph at the bottom because I want to illustrate to you that the South was in ruins and will remain so for decades, and decades, and decades. Per capita income is the income per person if you average it out over everyone. So per capita income would be like if you took the whole population and average it out. So this graph is the South per capita personal income as compared to the whole United States. It doesn't start out until 1930 because that's the best graph I could find. And I guess the 1931 is going to show you the Great Depression, but let's remember the whole country is in the Great Depression. In 1930, the South is barely above 50% of per capita income compared to the rest of the country. And if you notice this graph, it's not until 1970 until the South gets somewhere between 80 and 90% of per capita income to the rest of the country. So it was a century before the South kind of catches up with the rest of the country. And really, it was because of the effects of the Civil War.